So tonight's Dharma talk is entitled Working with Anger in the Midst of Global Crisis. So I think it's pretty obvious that right now the world is grappling with war, injustice, environmental crisis, and social oppression. And it's only natural for us to feel overwhelmed with anger, fear, and grief. These challenges of being overwhelmed with these emotions are often fueled by the same distortions that we're seeing externally. The distortions of greed, ignorance, and hatred. So in this talk, I'd like to explore how we can transform these heavy emotions into wise and compassionate action. And together, I hope we can look closely at the nature of anger, and in a way where it can help us to respond to global turmoil, both with heart and with effectiveness. So according to psychologists, I'm a clinical psychologist, and according to research psychologists, emotions have evolved to aid us with communication, to survive, to motivate, and to connect. However, while emotions have vital functions in being a human, I guess we can also say they have the possibility to become very destructive, and I think we all know that possibility with anger in particular. Like everything except Nibbana. Nibbana is called the unconditioned. It's the goal of Buddhist meditation and Buddhist practice. Everything except Nibbana arises because of causes and conditions. And these conditions for emotions include our personal history, like how we've been conditioned with our experience, our culture, and our evolutionary past. We have evolved as humans, and to be a human is a feature of being a human is to have emotions. They are completely natural. So constructive anger initiates change and provides the energy to overcome obstacles, address injustice, and protect oneself and others from harm. However, as we know, it can become destructive, and what happens with an emotion is that once triggered, we enter into a state where we can only process information that supports the emotion we are feeling. If we are angry, all we see is that which justifies our anger. It's like this narrow-mindedness. We can't break out of it, we engage with it. So it's pretty important to get some space for it. We can address destructive anger by staying mindful of its initial spark. Like there's a spark of anger, we can experience it. And refuse to give it oxygen. In other words, we are aware of it and we don't feed into it. We often feed into anger with our thoughts and our opinions and our ruminations and our worry and all sorts of things. We feed into it in the way we attend to the anger. If we feel if we get obsessed with thinking how bad people are and we get angry at them and we think about it, we're feeding into it, we're giving the anger oxygen. The other thing that happens when we become mindful of the spark, we reduce the time we are gripped by an emotion. And when we're gripped by an emotion, we're unable to see other perspectives. We also begin to unlearn the conditioned responses to emotions. Something I see a lot of people, sometimes with Buddhist meditators, they get upset that they get angry and they try to suppress it because they shouldn't be angry because it's an unwholesome, in Buddhism it's considered as unwholesome. However, anger we can't really control the arising of anger. If you think of in Buddhist meditation, we have something called a feeling tone. In Pali, it's called Vedana. Feeling tones are the quality of pleasantness, unpleasantness, or neither pleasantness or unpleasantness with experience. It's a really important component of ourselves that it helps to be aware of. Because if something's pleasant, we grasp after it. If something's unpleasant, we push it away. And if something's neither unpleasant or pleasant, we sometimes are uncertain what we're going to do with it. But these Vedana, or these feeling qualities, these feeling tones, we can't control them. We can't control the fact that, chocolate might be pleasant, or, when we get a cut in our foot or something, it's going to be unpleasant. We can't control that, but we can manage what we do with those experiences. We can feed into them and react, or we can just be mindful of them and not feed into any concerns or worries or frustrations or anger we might have with it. So when I'm speaking about feeling tones, I'm also speaking about emotions. They arise because of causes and conditions. We can't necessarily say, I'm not going to feel angry today, and then suddenly somebody sparks an angry response in you. You're going to feel the anger, but what we can do is we can manage it. We can not feed into it. And when we practice, we can be very mindful of it and go, oh, that's very interesting, isn't it? I wonder why I'm feeling that anger, rather than blaming the other person for our anger. So, in the Theravadan tradition, in Buddhism there's a number of traditions, and the Theravadan tradition is one of the earliest traditions. It's closest to what, the way the Buddha actually practiced, and it's closest to what happened in soon after the time of the Buddha in India. In that tradition, anger is never viewed as constructive. Rather, it is only viewed as a barrier to waking up and one of the root causes of suffering. From this perspective, the antidotes are replacing ill will. So from that perspective, I'll just say this. From that perspective, anger is equated with one of the hindrances in meditation, which is usually called ill will. And sometimes it's called aversion. So you can see how people can say, oh, it's the same as ill will. It blocks our emotions. One way we can work with it, one antidote to it, is replacing ill will with active loving kindness, or in Pali it's called metta, or warm benevolence. There's kind of warm friendliness to it. Actually, if you can be friendly to anger, it's fantastic. If you can be, oh, hello anger, how are you? It's been a long time since I've seen you. How are you going? Being loving and kind to it, it's a really good way of working with it. Another way we can work with it is recognizing or having insight into the temporary changing nature of the state of the mind, the self that's experiencing this, and the provocateur. Actually, there's no real self, in Buddhism, there's no real self that experiences things. There's just processes. I've often said this here, there's what's called this kind of interdependent process, and we often think it's a thing, but it's streams of dependently arising processes interacting, or streams of dependently arising processes interacting. So there's no real thing in it all. There's just these streams of conditions and causes, and we feel like there's a big self in it all. We do have a kind of a stream of continuity that we could call a self, but it's not a solid, lasting thing. So when we can see into and recognize the changing nature of the anger, there's no kind of thing in an anger, and what we call a self, as well as whatever's triggered the anger, it's a way of working with it. And also understanding that we alone own the consequences of our reactive choices. this is called karma actually. Karma in Pali translates as actions. And actions have consequences. That's a law, that's a Dharma law. That whatever we do, there's some consequence for that. There's some outcome to it. Causes have results. So, and when we can begin to understand this, and we begin to understand that everyone is on their own life trajectory, and they have to be responsible for their actions, because their actions affect them. I know that you could say, if someone come along and punched you, that's affecting you, but the karma they create, the actions they do, has an effect on their own life trajectory. And you can't take away, you can't, go in and replace someone's life trajectory. They have to be within that. They have to accept responsibility. The way it's spoken about is that they own their actions. I am the owner of my actions, heir to my actions, born of my actions, related to my actions, abide supported by my actions. Whatever actions I shall do, of those actions I shall be the heir. That's a saying in Buddhism. And it's actually a way of cultivating equanimity, which is this stable, centered understanding that everybody is the owner of their own actions. And we can't be responsible for another person's, we can't be responsible for another person's thoughts, feelings and behaviours, because it's within their own life trajectory. Going off on a bit of a tangent there. But anyway, so just giving you some ideas about anger here. Last year, I read an article that was calling out Buddhist teachers for remaining silent about social oppression and genocide that was and is still happening in Gaza. The criticisms and the requests for actions were warranted, in my opinion. And I think, I felt a bit, I felt a bit part of this. Like I tend to, as a Buddhist and Buddhist organizations and, my training as a Buddhist monk, I was a Buddhist monk once upon a time, is all about remaining non-partisan and non-political. So, we tend not to speak out about things. But when we're confronted with the killing, gross injustice and violations of human rights, the silent, indifferent disengagement could be considered as the near enemy of equanimity. Now, when I talk about near enemies, what I'm talking about is a distorted misrepresentation of a particular quality. Equanimity, as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot I can talk about with equanimity. But equanimity is this experience of being centered and stable and unshaken. And it's a way, equanimity is not necessarily agreeing with what's happening, but it's the willingness to accept what's happening as it is. Willingness to, it's a not denying, it's a willingness to open up to the reality of this moment. It's seeing this, and it's seeing that everybody's creating their own stories and their own outcomes in life. So it's, if we remain silent when we're seeing this sort of thing, it's like the near enemy of it. It looks like equanimity, but it's a false facsimile of it. In addition, this kind of silent indifference could be a denial of aligning to the Dharma. As we see it in the Four Noble Truths, the Four Noble Truths says that there is suffering, there is a cause for suffering, or dukkha, we call it dukkha. There is dukkha, there's a cause for dukkha, there's freedom from dukkha, and there's a way to be free. And it's about two cause-effect relationships. Suffering and its causes, freedom from suffering and its causes. And this can be applied to a whole range of things, all of life like this. So it's, we usually look at the Four Noble Truths within ourselves But the Buddha didn't say you just look within yourself. He talks about being mindful internally and externally. So it's sort of a denial of seeing the causal factors for a lot of people's suffering. And I think I gave a talk a couple of months ago here. I can't remember now. I think I did. Yeah, it was about the world of greed, ignorance, and hatred. The world is driven by greed, ignorance, and hatred. Burning. The world is burning with greed, ignorance, and hatred. But in that talk, I mentioned remaining silent about what is clearly unethical and harmful violations of human rights could be considered as colluding with these behaviours. Remaining silent could also be considered as wrong speech and unethical. Some situations could be compared to bullies in a school playground. And if we're in the school playground, if we see someone being bullied and really harmed, what do we do? Do we just stand by? Or do we go out and call it out? By not standing up for those who are being bullied, are we colluding with the bullies and just reinforcing their unwholesome behaviours? So unfortunately, not calling out is happening at a global scale here today and for years actually, by some very powerful bully politicians in the world. And I think they need to be called out. So engaged Buddhism was originally developed by, actually, I've got a paragraph here that I didn't mention. Speaking about schoolyard behaviours, when I went to high school in 1968 to 1973, a long time ago, I'm old, the motto for my school was obedience to conscience. I thought that was a great motto. What was it? Obedience to conscience. You know conscience, that sense of doing the right thing. Morally right behaviours, like ethical integrity. And it was obedience to conscience. It was obviously derived from a Latin term, but they said it in English. And I think it was a very powerful teachings for life. I read that motto when I was 12, when I first went to high school. Actually, I was 11 then, but anyway. And some of our leaders seem to lack this conscience. They seem to not have it. Because they're acting reprehensibly. They're acting recklessly and selfishly and causing a lot of suffering. So engaged Buddhism was originally developed by Thich Nhat Hanh as a way of addressing the suffering of the war, the Vietnam War, at a systemic level. And its approach to anger is a little bit different to the orthodox Theravadan approach. Engaged Buddhism does not disagree with the Theravadan view that anger is destructive. However, it shifts the focus towards social interconnectedness and compassionate action. From this perspective, anger is seen as a compost. And Thich Nhat Hanh often used the metaphor of a gardener, where anger is like organic waste. It smells bad and is most often unpleasant, but the skilled gardener doesn't throw it away. They use it to make compost to grow flowers. And the flowers here could be compassion and understanding. And another feature of engaged Buddhism is interbeing. And what it emphasizes is that the oppressor is also the victim of their own ignorance, environment, and upbringing. Anger is transformed into fierce compassion that seeks to stop the harm without hating the oppressor or the harmer. So, with the weight of the global crisis, climate change, social injustice and war, it can evoke overwhelming anger, fear and grief. However, I'm reminded that as long as there are good people positive change is possible. Now, I was talking to another Sangha member a couple of weeks ago, and she asked me, "Oh, how are you, Mal? How are you going?" And I said, "Oh, not too bad considering the craziness and the madness in the world right now." And she said to me, "Mal, as long as there's good people, there's going to be good things happen in the world." And I thought, fantastic, that's actually so true. So through Sangha, we can find the strength of the community. We can find the strength to act together rather than suffering in isolation. And there's hundreds of projects around the globe, all offering practical approaches to working with climate change, to work, for finding peace in war, finding social justice and reducing oppression and so on. By working together, we can drop by drop create peace. Refusing to feed into the mental distortions of greed, ignorance and hatred, and understanding the law of karma, that wholesome intentions lead to wholesome outcomes. All this gives us confidence to act with compassion and integrity. As a clinical psychologist, I know that sometimes people come and see me and the anger, this helpless outrage is often internalized. Like people will see the difficulties in the world and they can go they become very depressed or very anxious. With the depression, it's like the anger is internalized and they shut down. And what a good antidote for anger and anxiety actually is to do some action, do some meaningful action rather than feeling hopeless and helpless and often worthless. It's actually acting in a way that's constructive and helpful, that aligns with our values. And that's what coming back to conscience, I could talk about a particular wholesome pattern in Buddhism that is called hiriotapa. And hiriota means wise shame, wise shame and moral dread. Literally, it's in that those two qualities are called the guardians of the world, because they protect moral or ethical integrity within societies. They protect kind of a social propriety, doing what is right for the greater good, for the greater community. And I won't go into, this is wholesome shame. Wholesome shame, good way to translate that is conscience. I know that there's unwholesome shame as well. That's really horrible. I won't go into details about that right now. But so following the Eightfold Path, which is right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness and right concentration. When I say right, I'm meaning skillful. I'm meaning in the right direction, in the direction to freedom from suffering rather than in the direction of creating more suffering. Following the Eightfold Path leads to the peace of Nibbana. Now, Nibbana, that's a whole nother talk, but Nibbana is the unconditioned. It's where we can find security. It's where we can find freedom from suffering, freedom from freedom from the conditions that lead to suffering. And we can then offer it to the world in a world of conflict. This process begins internally. And some things we can do is, rather than fleeing from painful emotions, like pretending they're not there or just getting caught up in them, it's actually turned towards them so that we can understand them. And we turn towards them with courage and honesty. And we turn towards them with wholesome intentions driven by goodwill, like compassion and benevolence. We can also work with this by sitting with our dukkha, sitting with our difficulties, and applying mindfulness to it. Actually, by applying what's called the 7 factors of awakening, including warm benevolence and compassion. But the 7 factors of awakening go like this. There's mindfulness, then there's kind of an interest or a curiosity, or it's called investigation, and that leads to energy, which is this natural arising of a kind of a strong movement to do something that's balanced. Then that arises, then we have joy, then we have tranquility, concentration, or this unification of our mind. It's called samadhi in Pali, but this unification of mind. And then also equanimity. These are called the 7 factors of awakening, and they're really helpful to apply to whatever suffering we may have, because we're looking into it, we're turning towards it rather than avoiding it and running away and just not having time to deal with it. I don't want to know about it. Rather than feeding into it like that, we feed into our suffering with our avoidance, by the way. Rather than feeding into it, we're turning towards it with these 7 factors. So mindful presence, and mindful presence is the beginning of that. And interconnection, by seeing our shared reality, it fosters a deep value for all living beings. I think this is coming back to having loving kindness. Like, I often speak about my grandchildren, and recently I was just enjoying the Easter break with them. It was really great. There's 7 of them, but they weren't all together on that occasion. But just kind of watching these children play and be themselves and run around, and there's a certain, I know they can be naughty sometimes, but there's a certain innate goodness that we can see in these beings. And if we can see it in somebody, we can see it in somebody else. And it's about seeing everyone, seeing their Buddha nature, seeing their beautiful qualities, seeing the goodness in them, because everyone has this potential to be a Buddha, to be awakened, fully awakened, and they're all lovable. So if we can see that, we can't harm anybody. And this naturally enables us to live with impeccable ethics. And we naturally cease to cause any harm anywhere. And we realize through our own experience the ancient law, as is written in the Dhammapada: hatred will not cease hatred, but by love alone. In other words, hatred does not cease hatred. Love alone ceases hatred. Love alone brings us love. So thank you for your compassionate attention, and let's have a few moments of quiet, and I'll open the floor up for some questions or